Matt, if you look at Matt's profile on LinkedIn, on LinkedIn it says, one designer, well used but in great condition. I can't speak for his condition because it might raise a few eyebrows, but he's certainly been well used, and he's been well used by some really amazing organisations. BBC, he'll go into all this himself, I'm sure. BBC, YouView. He's been involved in GEL and the kind of the common language there used at the Babe across a number of different platforms. He's done work with Skype. The guy really has got himself out and about, and the way that this has come about, if anybody thinks that social media is not a powerful tool for creating symbiotic relationships, Matt and myself and Richard, where are you, Richard? Down there. And Gareth Hammond. We met Matt at an Elbow concert, actually, which isn't really true, but because we weren't at the concert, but there was an Elbow concert on, and we decided to move off Twitter onto Path, and we've been, inverted commas, talking ever since. And Matt is one of the nicest people I've ever virtually met. Until today, when I actually met him, and I have to say he's a great guy. So I'm not going to talk any longer. I'm going to let Matt talk. So without any further ado, Matt Coyne.
Hello. I've got a little confession to make. This is my first ever speaking gig. Sorry to disappoint. So, as you might expect, when Richard and Dara approached me about this and asked me to give a little talk about me, what I do, what makes me tick, a part of this series, initially I was really honoured to be here, really happy to be here, but as you might imagine, the nerves kind of struck pretty quickly. What do I write about? What do I talk about? Why me? I got pretty anxious. And then earlier in the hotel I was tweaking, meddling, as you do with the slides, as I find out that you do with the slides, even an hour before the talk. I kind of looked at myself in the mirror and was reminded of a scene of one of mine and my daughter's favourite movies, unashamedly. So please be nice. I'm all three of those things, mostly in that order. You see the little thing down the bottom, the serial contractor, that's kind of my confession as well. I've never worked full-time for anybody. Back in '97, I think I graduated and I tried to make a go of it on my own. It didn't really work. And then started contracting in London. Didn't really understand what it was at the time. It was just another gig. And I've just come from contract to contract and seemingly have managed to make a go of it over the years in some nice places. I am, as the intro has said, a visual and interaction designer. That's sort of happened over the years. It's not a title I like, I'm a designer. But it's something that the industry understands. It's what I go under and it gets me work, so that kind of helps. You can find me on the interwebs mostly as Matt Coyne, pretty much everywhere. Twitter, of course, Instagram, definitely too much. I've been known to do a kind of series of pictures. He's laughing already. It's a bit Marmite. Some people love it, some people hate it, but I tend to take pictures of people asleep. If you want to have a look, it's under the hashtag Sleep Club. There's quite a few of us doing it, strangely. It's a bit of a movement. So yeah, feel free to check that out if you fancy. So, well, I've been in contract work for about 6 or 7 years. I've been really lucky, I think, to work with some great people, great organisations, great projects. In-house design teams, agency La La Land in London. It's all part of what I've done. I definitely prefer doing the the kind of in-house product-led stuff. There's more focus, there's more of a challenge to get something delivered rather than kind of preying on the will of some of the clients that you get in, some of the agencies that I've worked in. I'm going to concentrate on sort of 3 major clients that I've worked with. The BBC I've been back and forth with for the 6 or 7 years. I've spent some time with them on some major ambitious projects and some small ones. O2 was part of agency land, if you like. I was working for Razorfish at the time, and I was brought in after working for the BBC to work on a specific project, which we'll go into further. And then YouView, I spent 2 years at YouView, so I was a contractor with a full-time job almost. And was there from kind of inception of the project through to almost the launch of the product. So, the title of this talk, it's kind of rushed out a little bit. I realise now, having reflected on it, it's a bit grandiose, it's a bit dry. Hoping that I can actually deliver on it. But certainly what came to mind as I was writing the talk, there was a couple of other things, sort of subtitles, if you like, to the talk that would probably make a little bit more sense as we go through. But a really good quote from the inventor of Subaru, if you know her, Jane. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the surname. Good design makes everything look easy, but making things happen is really fucking difficult. And that's true of everything that I've done over the last 6 or 7 years. The stakeholders that I've had to deal with, the products that we've tried to push through to launch have been a difficult but challenging and very pleasing in the end process. This was me on Path a few weeks ago. It was a bit of a trying time at the BBC. We were going through heated debates of frivolous things, really, to be honest. But yeah, it's not about you. It's really about the people that I was dealing with at the time. But it is quite much a salient point to some of the stuff that I do, some of the people that I deal with, and some of the things that I try and achieve. And hopefully some of this will become clearer and not offensive as I go through the talk. So, what's this talk about? What it's not about defining the UX process. There's far too much about that already. It's not about design principles. You've already had to talk about that. Gov.uk have written a book on design principles, and they've written a manual. I can't really do that either. So this is my attempt really at kind of offloading some of the experiences I've had, lessons I've learned along the way, and I hope that some of it at least will resonate with you in some way, and you can take away something from it. Let's just see how that goes. So we'll start with the BBC. It's kind of a chronological order, but I didn't really want to do that, but it kind of makes sense, and we offload some points as we go through, and I'll sum up with the kind of lessons at the end of the talk. So 6 years ago, I'd already done a stint at the BBC on the iPlayer beta. Bit of a strange project. We didn't quite launch it, didn't quite go to plan, but somehow I did something right. They brought me back in, back into the arms of Auntie, and they wanted to get me involved in quite an ambitious project. And it was all to do with really kind of unifying the BBC products into a kind of consistent and coherent whole. At the time, and when I say products, so you'll know them as BBC News, BBC Sport, iPlayer, Weather, etc. Everything at the time was very inconsistent. There was a small team of us. As with most projects that you do, you kind of collate where you are at that stage. So we kind of ended up with this wall of shame. It's a really nasty picture. This was 2007. The iPhone wasn't even in existence. I had crappy cameras, and anyway, I think you can get the gist. It was kind of it's conflicting designs and user journeys, all of which depicted sort of various epochs of innovation at the time. Nothing kind of stayed the same. Everything kind of did something, and another thing moved on and did another bit of innovation. And more importantly, I think many of them weren't even clearly branded as part of the BBC's digital offering, and that was kind of a big point. I'll just click through a few of these. I mean, if you remember the BBC homepage, I don't know if any of you remember this, but I mean, as a single item, if you like, as a single project, it was fantastic at the time. If you've heard of the Glass Wall project, there's a fantastic document that's probably leaked around the internet somewhere, if you haven't seen it already, which documents the process they went to get to this. And it's kind of an adaptive homepage that reacted to your usage, etc., all that sort of thing. But it was just there, sitting there on its own, crouching in a corner at 760 pixels. And if I go through, so we've got news, sport, food, radio, science and nature, all very, very different. Not even using the BBC blocks, as they call them, the BBC logo. Typography all over the place, image use is different, everything pretty much different. It was horrible. So one thing we learned from that at the time is, and this is kind of my first point to make, pain equals focus. You've got to get that painful bit out of the way. You've got to know what you're dealing with, and it helps you then focus on the task at hand. With the BBC in particular, it was almost devastating for some of the product owners to look at as a whole and sort of see where, or not actually understand where things have gone wrong. So we set up a small team. There was about 6 to 8 designers, I think, some IAs, some interaction designers, some visual. We set up working groups within the products. So we had some designers were embedded, if you like, within product areas. And we set up, I think we called it a user experience cluster. Strange name, but that's the BBC at the time. We met up regularly. We presented ideas, we got feedback, we iterated, and we got to the point where we agreed. And that's kind of, I think a lot of this, as I go through it and I talk about it, it's kind of simple, but it's bringing it all together at the end where it kind of makes sense. So collaborating early, always, especially in an organisation like that, where you've got disparate design teams spread over different products, all doing different things, being able to bring them in together and kind of work with them, collaborate with them to get to a particular destination is key. We also had a new controller of UX and D, user experience and design. They had controllers of parts of the business. I think the organisation has changed now in terms of they reorg quite a lot, but they were called controllers. You had controller of TV, controller of user experience and design, controller of the internet as well, which is kind of strange. But he was an American called Richard Titus. He came from setting up Razorfish at some point over in the States. A great outside influence, someone who didn't really know the BBC at the time, could see the kind of macro problems. He had vision. He also, as the controller of UX and D, had the authority to kind of take charge and do something about this, and was not afraid to kind of be a bit gung-ho about it. Took on the other controllers, did his bit, really kind of fought for the team. But he wasn't afraid to change his mind. He was kind of throwing himself about there, trying to make sense of all, and didn't really mind kind of just being told in some respects and respecting his designers to sort of change his viewpoint, but get there in the end. And as I said, there is a right pain in the arse. He wouldn't let things go, but that's a good thing, really, especially in an organisation like the BBC. So find a champion. You need someone to be able to take it by the horns, drive it, keep it together, keep it on track, and not let go. Some of the stuff we did with the BBC in that particular project, at the time, I think people like Mark Bolton, Coyne, or Vine, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, we're all talking about grids. It's my first kind of introduction to the world of grids outside of print, which I'd kind of let go several years previously. Everyone was going wider, so from the sort of 700 pixels, 800 screens to the 1024s. So, you know, we started devising grids, something that could be used across, this is stuff you probably all deal with on a day-to-day basis if you're in the web design business. Looking at kind of global mastheads, looking at consistent image sizes and proportions, and then kind of putting them together into a particular product. So the homepage, BBC Wales, CBeebies, and to Z, a whole lot more. So we had this, let me go back a bit. So you see here on the menu there, so we had this global nav. Actually, that doesn't show everything. We had this global nav that kind of listed products. And then we had an Explore the BBC, which had a few more products. And then we had another button that said a whole lot more. There's so much going on within the BBC. It was really hard to actually get this together as a kind of coherent whole. And that was kind of the culmination of that. And whereby you still get the kind of flexibility within the products to have some kind of personality. There was still some cohesiveness to it. It was still really difficult to push certain things through. Typography as a whole wasn't thought of in a way that we could actually get consistent use of it. There was chat between designers, but it didn't really happen as well as some other projects. In 2008, I joined Razorfish. I was brought in after the BBC project to do a similar kind of thing. Initially, I was brought in to look at, to work on the O2 account, as it were, and thinking about the redesign of the UK portal, the website. Razorfish already had the shop, but they didn't work with the portal. That was an in-house job, but they persuaded and they pitched. They want to pitch to sort of go through and look at the portal as a whole. There was a complete overhaul of what was just a plethora of different platforms, huge amounts of microsites. They just every time they launched a new phone or a new service, they just ended up kind of bringing another site, another this, another that, and they're all different. We ended up doing, as I say, complete IA overhaul, content migration of the site itself, and really kind of broke it down into, because we knew what we were doing, we were moving an existing amount of content over into a new platform, but bringing it into one platform. We needed to kind of break it down into the smaller parts, identify the smaller parts, look at what was there, look at what we actually wanted to, or had to output, as it were. The usual stuff, I guess, really. This is leading somewhere. Colour palettes, buttons, forms, tables. This is not animal. Oh, there we go. So much the amount of content we had to deal with was quite kind of very comprehensive and effectively kind of got to the point where you realised that you were kind of had to break it down into those separate elements to be able to bring it into some kind of cohesive, coherent nature. The typography thankfully played some kind of part, and then we kind of started building up, so using the brand elements, bringing in the content, the grid, looking at text pages, how it would build up, and looking at consistent style, and then bringing that into the kind of more hero pages, so the home page, an explore page for kind of more of their services, the iPhone, the best design out of the lot. And this kind of approach at the time, it just seemed like the right thing to do. We didn't really question it. It was just something that we felt, because of the way the project was going, it felt like the right approach. And recently, I came across this thing from this article from Brad Frost talking about atomic web design, and it rang true. It kind of brought me back to what we were doing, and it's all about breaking it down into their smaller parts, looking at it from a atomic level, looking at labels and input fields and buttons, building up to kind of the molecules, if you like, so search entry fields with the buttons, to sort of organisms, so your mastheads that contain those molecules, and up to templates and pages. And this is kind of, one of the most fascinating parts. I think we're not designing pages anymore. We're designing systems of components. And I think it really kind of rings true, and this was back in 2008 that we were doing the O2 site, and it still rings true with some of the things that we do now, sort of bringing it down into that kind of atomic level. So start with atoms. Bring it down to that level and try and kind of build yourself up to that smaller, that bigger whole, if you like. And that's an easier way, I think, have been able to starting to persuade people into bringing these things into this cohesive whole. We've got to remember that we're looking at organisations like the BBC and O2 that were just rampant in terms of just creating content but not really thinking about what they were doing with it, how they were presenting it, and what it meant to the user. So UK was getting a grip on what they were doing. The O2 brand pretty much was, in taxes is a bit of a melodrama, but they were having problems. They had a legal problem, in effect, that all their brand elements weren't being used consistently. So their business wasn't, well, their brand itself, the brand elements, weren't defendable. And that was proven in a court case. I can't remember who it was with now, but they were told effectively that they had no prior art. Their blue gradient, which they believed they owned, their bubbles, which they believed they owned bubbles, other bits and pieces of their brand elements, this just wasn't something they could defend in court. So they kind of, through the process of doing the UK site, everything has to go through brand. We started having some really interesting conversations with them, and started looking at how we could start bringing this through to a kind of European level. They have territories in Slovakia, Germany, Ireland, and Czech Republic, and the UK. And there was a Euro tour. We started pulling together a kind of visual language, which was based on the UK site, obviously. That's what we knew. And we were trying to push it out to these European territories. We went around to the different locales, except the Czech Republic. They really didn't want to know. And tried to kind of get to grips and do workshops and try and find a way of kind of bringing that language, that visual language, across all of O2. To a certain degree it worked. It was almost kind of a harder version of these working groups, this user experience cluster in the BBC. Different language barriers, different cultures, but the desire from brand to kind of push through this consistent language. But in the end, after, even with the UK site, there was a kind of handover from the client. There was no real traction in the kind of European territories. There was no champion. The brand weren't really pushing it. They didn't feel like they could. And effectively, everything kind of broke down a bit. If you've seen the O2 site now, it's completely different to, I mean, we're talking a few years back, but they changed quite rapidly and started adding things and changing typography and all sorts. So governance, I think, is another area where, you know, alongside the champion is kind of managing these scenarios and kind of bringing, not looking at just delivering what you have right now, but also look into the future. How do you actually govern that? How do you make sure you keep that consistency, but allowing you to evolve with that design as well? YouView, 2009 to 2011, 2 years as a contractor on a project. They were spilling money out. It was ridiculous. But we were there from kind of inception to launch almost. It was a BBC project to start off with. It was called Project Canvas. And if you don't know, if you haven't seen YouView at all, YouView is effectively Freeview on steroids. It is a Freeview box. It's got a broadband connection, so you've got your live telly. You can go backwards in time to get your catch up. Like a lot of the stuff is doing right now, you've also got your on-demand, and it's what Sky are doing now as well. But at the time, it was unprecedented. I mean, that's what a lot of UV boxes looked like at the time. So the key kind of differentiators, I think, for us when we started looking at the project and what we could do was around the content, what we could actually add to people's experience of telly, if you like. Not just your 5 channels, which is effectively what you got on Freeview. Top-up cars, yes, you can get more, but you didn't really have a lot of scope for doing much more. And the idea was to sort of bring the idea of what Sky was doing with their Sky Plus, the pausing and rewinding, but adding to that. And then also the user experience in UI. I mean, that was, as you see from from that kind of slide, there was a lot of opportunity to make the experience for people on telly a lot better. Simple as that. This is kind of an oddity of a slide in terms of what I'm doing here, but it does make sense to me in terms of the UI itself is effectively made up of words and design have to be taken together. We brought in a kind of copywriter to work alongside us and work with. It was a self-set-up box. There was a lot of scope for things to go wrong. A gentleman called Mike Reed, who may be talking here at some point, came alongside and worked full-time with us. He worked with the designers at the same time, rather than just bringing them in at a point where you go, can you just change that label a little bit? It was a key moment to bring in the kind of tone of voice of the product, how it speaks to you, how you set up the product, and it kind of really informed and was one of the kind of groundbreaking moments, I think, in the project at least when we brought him in. But we had to go through these guys. There were 7 joint venture partners, all big guns of TV. TalkTalk BT, if you know YouView, they supply it as a kind of subscription-based model. Archiva's kind of a back-end thing. They do Seesaw and content delivery. There were some odd moments within the whole project in those 2 years. There were kind of 3 distinct phases. There was Project Canvas, as I mentioned, which is kind of a BBC project. That's how it started. Even before Project Canvas, they called it Free TV and Miguel. There's all sorts of kind of weird project names that it was given, trying to get this idea off the ground and into the market. We ended up with YouView, but in the middle of it was this car crash telly, as I call it. It's just my strange name for it. But basically, it's kind of this hinterland where it wasn't a BBC project anymore. It wasn't a YouView. It wasn't there as a business. It had loads of kind of quasi-regulatory problems. We had a team that was in flux. We had creative directors that were supposed to be from the BBC and loaned into us, but were pulled off onto other projects. There was no real direction. And then egos started turning up. Various people on the team, some of them in the kind of higher exec roles, certainly gave cause for concern as to how we'd kind of get this thing off the ground. And this was already a year into the project. So result, car crash UI. There's a real kind of hybrid of horrible stuff. But what we ended up with was, I hope, quite a nice, lovely UI for telly. I haven't got any kind of videos. The transitions, the animations are really nice. I wish I could have shown them here. We kind of came through and got quite a slick UI eventually after 2 years, and now it's launched. It's 600,000 homes, kind of working all right, I think. Don't give up, basically. 2 years of hard graft of trying to get something together, of kind of everything in flux and finally coming together. There was a vision for the project and for the product, and it finally kind of came good. I'm going to apologise for the next few slides. It's all words. There's no illustrations. It's the stuff I've been doing most recently in the BBC. It's all kind of under wraps, unfortunately. So I'm just going to have to talk about it. So BBC One Service was kind of an evolution of what you might know as GEL, the Global Experience Language, which was kind of like the V2 of what we did in the first instance in 2007. GEL was when Neville Brody got his hands on it and started kind of drumming up these lovely kind of unique words for the BBC, but took it a step further to what we'd been able to achieve just as a kind of in-house team. So One Service was this idea of everyone being the BBC. It's not products anymore. It wasn't BBC News, BBC iPlayer, BBC Weather, BBC Sport. It's about BBC being one service. So it was a vision piece, really, for 2014. 10 products, 4 screens, 1 service. 4 screens, meaning the TV, desktop, mobile, tablet, and trying to create something that worked across all those platforms in a, again, coherent and consistent manner. There are some key themes that we were trying to bring into it. This kind of idea of global navigation and live and happening now. Personal experiences, something personal to the user, and contextual. Ideas of, as I said, what's happening now, telling stories and creating paths for people, paths between products, trying not to think about things as products, but as a story, of going to a news story and finding your way around to relate your content into science and nature, for instance, and then ongoing journeys from there. So contextual everywhere, enhancing the experience wherever you are, saving wherever you are, but experiencing that anywhere. So being able to, favoriting stuff on a mobile and then bringing it back to your TV, for instance. Your favorite show on iPlayer, see it on the tube, favorite that, back to your TV, I've got it. We concentrated on things like the core reading experience, trying to get things that felt the same across all the platforms. Creating standards, again looking at atomic design, breaking it down, and effectively simplifying the experience, not just for the user, but also for the designers that would have to try and work with this vision, this one service vision. I was reminded of a quote from an interview with President Obama when he's talking about his decisions that he makes on a daily basis, that he only wears grey or blue suits. He doesn't want things getting in the way, he doesn't want to have to make too many other decisions. He mentioned research that shows that the simple act of making decisions sort of degrades one's ability to make further decisions. One of my creative directors had the same lunch every day, and he wanted to wear a suit every day. He wanted a uniform. And he's in the same mind. He didn't want to make those decisions, he didn't want to think about it. And I think the same, there's obviously extremes you can go to in that instance, but I think the same sort of thing applies for not only the user and simplifying the decisions that they have to make, the paths that they have to take within something that you produce, whether it be the user interface on telly or a website, but also for the designers that are in hand. If you're creating kind of a visual language or some kind of guidelines for the designers to adhere to, or to comply with in some fashion, then to simplify those decisions that they have to make, the grid, the typography, the colour palette, all quite simple things, but in some of the organisations that I've worked with, because of the very nature of the beast, the designer trying to create another product, trying to create another thing, they find ways of doing something else. And that's our nature, I think, as a designer, is to try and find the new, do something different, in amongst trying to comply with that brief. And so simplifying decisions is a key factor for what I've been, for you and your audience. But with this project, there's a but. It was a vision piece. We had quite a kind of controlled team. There's like a SWAT team coming in, and it's like 6 or 8 of us just sort of on our own, doing our own thing, and saying, what do we think this is going to be based on the knowledge we have of certain kind of themes that we need to bring in, some products that we need to integrate. But there wasn't any real collaboration with the teams. There wasn't any kind of connection in that way. So the autonomy that we had really kind of disconnected us from the BBC designers, the teams embedded within the products. And effectively the project, although it's kind of been taken on as something else, it sort of fell flat on its face. It was a lovely, lovely bit of work. I really wish I could show you some stuff, but I was only told yesterday that I had to keep it under wraps. We went to the point of kind of creating stories in video, whole kind of production unit, telling the story of how users might use this product, how things are similar, same across here, save things, etc. All the things I've been talking about. But as I said, what we effectively had was a new exec came in and didn't have the kind of, it wasn't a lack of ownership, I think, in some respects. And it lost its priority, but in the meantime, I think they've kind of used the project to start another project on the same sort of thing, which is interesting. And then the connected red button, so we all use red button on the telly. The connected red button is effectively a kind of broadcast version of that rather than the horrible red bar you see down the side of your telly, which can't do much. It was a case of actually being a bit more real with it, applying the one service vision, or learnings from that, applying it to one platform, taking it to the telly, taking it to internet, IPTV. And it really was real. This was going to be looking at design patterns based in code. So creating patterns for a player on telly, which, again, like I mentioned before, with the BBC, I think, maybe I didn't, they had plenty of different players for playing one piece of video on different piece of product, different products. There was no kind of joined up experience, everything was different. So creating patterns like a player, like a carousel on TV, things that you would essentially think for one product, no problem, because you've got that autonomy, you can devise your own product. But having that experience across news, sport, weather, iPlayer, was a different kettle of fish and trying to get that to work. So usable by all products, flexible for their use as well, so it still had some way of creating some injecting some personality into the products. But it's still iPlayer, it's still news and sport. You recognise it to a certain extent. So we work with live products. Glastonbury is launching, must be next weekend, I think. So a music events app, if you like, on if you've got Virgin Media TiVo, then you'll find it under the red button on Glastonbury. And you can maybe laugh at some of the stuff that we've done. iPlayer are launching in September with theirs on PS3, and Sport, I think, sometime in December. So working with these kind of live projects really focused us. I mean, and allowed us to kind of essentially make it real. Again, there's a but to this. The problems that we faced. I've mentioned the embedded teams, I think. Designers that were part of your kind of central team on the BBC, in the UX&D team, get kind of rotated around products like News Sport, iPlayer, etc. And there's a little phrase you see there, it's like when designers go native, they kind of get themselves embedded within the product and they just start thinking about their product and their product only. And start defending the difference and start thinking about how we can make iPlayer different, more cool. There was something about some chart that said iPlayer was more cool than the BBC, and they kind of stuck with that. And it was an interesting way of kind of trying to work with people on your team, but also defending their own product in some ways. We've all got deadlines, we all need to launch, we're launching at different times. Just trying to find a way of creating that kind of compromise, creating something that can really just sort of be different, but only when you need to be. I remember being in this is when that All Designers Are Dicks came up, but one particular occasion we had a heated debate over 8-pixel gutters on a grid. I mean, it's just little things like that which were kind of bizarre and don't help the kind of true cause, if you like. So beware the natives, here be dragons. So, neatly into 10 points, I think. Pain equals focus, as I mentioned. Sort of get your demons out there. Understand what you're facing. Don't shy away from it. Collaborate early. Make sure you're kind of working with the teams surrounding you. I mean, if it's in organisations like the BBC and YouView and O2, Razorfish, etc., there was so many people working on different things to sort of make sure that we're collaborating with the right people, finding a champion, making sure someone's going to take you on that journey and not let go. Simplify decisions, as I've mentioned, making sure you kind of just can get on with it. Do what's more important. Be creative. Start with atoms. Start small. Build up to that kind of more of a kind of a whole. Build things from small elements up to bigger elements that can be used and reused across the system. If you've got no governance, you've got no chance going forward. There's a few places where that's just fallen over completely. If you haven't got a plan for the future, then things are just going to go back and cycle back to where they were before. Don't give up, never give up. Always strive for what you believe in. The autonomy equals disconnect. I mean, you just need to be, and it kind of goes in hand with the make it real. You need to be involved with real projects, involved with the real kind of stakeholders. And as I said, beware the natives. Thank you.
Matt, I can imagine working with a copywriter would be most designers' idea of hell, sitting over their shoulder or whatever. Have you any examples of where that, how that worked in practice, or?
So, as I said, with YouView was when we had the most successful collaboration, I would say, with a copywriter. I knew Mike briefly through Twitter again. I've met him once before. I knew of his work, and I just suggested that it would be a good idea to see if we can try and involve a copywriter at this stage. There's always a wonder whether you can kind of keep someone like that on board all the time when you're going through concepting, sprint zero, whatever you want to call it. But it kind of works. So he had other roles within the business to play. There was kind of an overall tone of voice for the product, how that would work with marketing, how marketing wanted to work with him as well. Working with a website, how, just general kind of overall copywriting, I guess. But I think the most successful part of the project for us working together was when we looked at the setup process. It's really dry kind of idea of how do I set up my box. I mean, it's not like Sky when you get an engineer coming across, installing the box, switching it on, doing a few button tweaks, and there you go, start watching telly. This was a box you bought from John Lewis, or maybe got from TalkTalk, maybe it was different with them, but you could buy it from a high street store, take it back to your house, plug it in, and hope it worked. Now with the UV box, it's quite complex, inside at least, and the idea was to try and simplify that experience. So within that kind of process of trying to create that setup experience, that really what you'd imagine just to be a case of, I just want to watch some telly, just get me to it. It needed to be friendly, it needed to be warm, understandable, no fluff. And it also had to work with that process of things potentially going wrong. And I think the workflow, the process that we went through with Mike and the specific interaction designers and visual designers that worked on that particular part of the UI, wasn't me, was really, really successful. Back and forth, lots of different flows, lots of different outcomes, and in effect a really, really simple process. Always simple if it works, still kind of happy to a certain extent if it doesn't, because of the way in which the collaboration works, to make sure you're not just kind of defining something as a flow and then coming to the point where actually the language doesn't make sense, or it's a bit harsh here, and if you start manipulating stuff on the fly as you go through that process, then it can affect and inform each other. At the BBC, always use a test, always. They have specialist usability people who set up and run usability testing for any projects that it's deemed necessary, and that's most of them, to be perfectly honest. from back in, say, the 2007 project with the global visual language for the BBC, looking at global navigation, looking at search, but not really testing the visual language per se, but the elements that went within it. YouView, again, constant user testing from the project canvas days onwards, really. It was just a process that we went through continually. And then just iterating upon it and making sure that the product was informed by that usability testing, as you would hope.
What did you do for project management across all these things with the BBC?
Depending on the project, to be perfectly honest. With the first one, with the global visual language, that was project managed. Others, not so much. YouView was a really good example of having project managers across the board for UX, but also for dev, etc. as well, and the product team. And having that kind of close liaison with the dev team as well. And so worked on 2-week sprint cycles to work on particular features. When we were getting into the delivery phase, it was literally kind of hands on deck, 2 weeks, deliver functions and features, get them to the dev. Hopefully at some point iterate.